Ladies and gentlemen, from Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi, please welcome J. Don Luna.
In 2011, I got to meet someone that I'd been admiring their career for many, many years. We knew him as Hawkeye Pierce on MASH, but he's also been in multiple films and many, many different television productions. Mr. Alan Alda. So I was invited to go to the Summer Institute for Communicating Sciences at Stony Brook University. And there I am on stage with all of these other people, and we're about to do a workshop. And in walks Alan Alda. And I leaned over to the person next to me and I said, oh my gosh, that's Alan Alda. And I noticed that he was doing the same thing. He leaned over to a person next to him and went, oh my gosh, that's J. Don Luna. So I got to meet him. So what is a theater person doing going to a Summer Institute for Communicating Sciences? And better still, why was Alan Alda the person that was in charge of this and was leading the charge for communicating sciences? And it goes back to a television production that Alan Alda was involved with called Frontiers. And he was able to travel all across the globe interviewing scientists. And what he found was their work was so important and so interesting and captivating, but they had trouble communicating that to a non-scientific audience. So he started listening to himself and his own work, and he said, you know, it's my training in theater, improvisational games, different strategies that we use in theater. And he said, I'll bet this will work with scientists. So he went to Stony Brook University and they started a Center for Communicating Sciences using his techniques on how to communicate science. And that's what I did. I learned those techniques one summer. Now, I've been in theater for over 45 years. And so I started immediately giving workshops around the country on communicating the sciences. And those workshops were very, very successful. In fact, I've been called back time and time again. But let me give you an example of one of the workshops first, and then you can see how they work. Now, this one is dealing with stage fright. Now, all theater people get it, and most of us get it too before we go up any time to stand and talk before a group, right? So I'd like to have the people in the center table here to stand, please. Thank you. And everyone stare at them for 5 seconds. Yes, and that's probably the longest 5 seconds you've had today, right? Now what I'd like you to do is I would like you to count the lights in the ceiling for 5 seconds. Great, thank you. You can have a seat. Now, what you probably experienced was that thing called stage fright, where we get a little nervous and our stomach, we get butterflies. But when you had something to do, that went away. So one of the things that I do is I use the elevator speech, the 1-minute speech, and the 3MT, the 3-minute talk that are popular with science majors right now. And I use that as my goal as I use all of these theater activities leading there. So we work on verbal, nonverbal skills, delivery skills, and content. Content is very important because you're trying to communicate to a non-scientific or non-scientific audience. At Texas A&M University, we're working with mechanical engineering students, and you can imagine their work is quite technical. And so we want to work with them to communicate to a non-technical audience because they may be the persons that are employing them, or they may be asked to speak to a non-scientific audience about their work. Let me give you an example of the way that we work with content. I play a theater game called Celebrity Interview, whereas I am the talk show host, and the students that are wanting to learn how to communicate their science, they are the persons that are being interviewed. So I was interviewing this one young man, and he says, you know, my work is so technical, no one could possibly understand what I do. I said, well, let's talk about it a little bit. How about you tell me what happens? He says, well, mine is, I'm a marine biologist, so mine is on preserving the red snapper, because 50 weeks out of the year, when they're caught, they have to be thrown back in. And when they swim back down to 100 and 150 feet where they live, they die. And I said, well, let's talk about why they die. I said, so as they come up, what's happening? He says, well, they have a bladder inside of them that expands. I said, oh, you mean like a balloon? And he said, well, yeah, it's like a balloon. I said, so whenever you throw them back in, they swim down too fast and the balloon doesn't have time to collapse, and so it explodes. He said, yeah, that's it exactly. So that became his metaphor for his work. Another young man was, his work was instructional strategies for mentally challenged children. And I was talking to him. We're playing the interview game. And I said, tell me about your work. And he started in all the technicalese and this and this and this and lots of statistics and that sort of thing. And I said, let's talk about your interest in it. When did you first become interested in instructional strategies for mentally challenged children? He said, well, my mentor was running a session with mentally challenged students, and he asked me after the session if I would walk this young man out to his car, his mother's car. And I said, sure, I would do that. And he said, as he walked out, the little boy reached up and slid his hand in his and tugged on it and said, thank you, mister, for making learning fun. And he said at that moment, he knew what he was supposed to do for the rest of his life. Now, those are just a couple of examples of helping students to learn how to communicate their research agenda. And Alan Alda calls finding that is finding your voice. So that's what I try to do. I try to help scientists voice their research agenda to a non-scientific audience. Because if you find your voice, no one can silence you. Thank you.